This week on Act Out, no more war, not over there, but not over here either. We draw important connections between imperialism's global reach and the home game. Next up, Puerto Rico has been pummeled by natural disasters, but even more devastating are the man-made disasters wrought by capitalism and colonialism. We sit down with two mutual aid folks from Puerto Rico to get the grassroots perspective. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. This past weekend, folks around the country came together at anti-war protests focusing not just on the escalation against Iran, but on the red thread of militarization and oppression, from over there to right here at home. Indeed, an important and effective way of talking about war is to connect it to the daily lives of people who live in the U.S. Because look, I get it. You're working 2 or 3 jobs, you're barely scraping by, you're activated locally when you can on issues like water or food, police brutality, maybe even healthcare. But war is just so nebulous. It's a world away, and you've got groceries to buy. The thing is, people here in this country can't have a good life if our government, in our name, is murdering, torturing, and oppressing millions worldwide. And I just don't mean that like in a philosophical, none are free till we are all free kind of way, though that is also true. I mean that in a dollars and common sense kind of way. When almost $1 trillion goes to the war machine, of course the dutiful sycophants of the empire will say starving people in need of food are costing too much, or the people who work their asses off are sick and tired, don't deserve the basic human right of health care in the richest country in the world. Because when the richest country in the world spends almost all of that money in one place, there's just not a lot left over to address basic human rights like food, healthcare, or shelter. Like we saw in Oakland recently with the Moms for Housing debacle, 4 Black mothers and their children seeking shelter in Oakland's Alameda County, where you'd need to earn more than $48 an hour to afford the median rent. Thanks to national attention and powerful grassroots organizing, the mothers have negotiated a deal to buy that house that they were recently forcibly removed from at gunpoint. Still, that's one story with a happy ending. Most don't end that way. Most just end with the gunpoint. The SWAT teams that show up in the middle of the night to evict families or to do a wellness check, or to break doors and bodies because there's a faint odor of weed. And where do these SWAT teams get their toys? Where do militarized police get their paradigm of war on the home front? Well, as we've covered on this show before, they get it directly from our military. Our police wouldn't be able to look like RoboCop were it not for our bloated military budget. And the prioritization of basic human rights can't coexist with a paradigm of war, imperialism, and capitalism. Again, it's dollars and common sense. So when people ask what war has to do with them in their daily lives, the answer is yes. You name it. The mere fact that people have to work 2 jobs, that rents can skyrocket while wages stagnate, because there's always room to make money off the people's labor, but not give them enough to survive, certainly not thrive. Because you have to feed the beast, the insatiable war machine. There's always resources to militarize police in response to increased crime, because the guns and armor are already laying there, compiling dust like the more than 2,000 Abrams tanks in the California desert, which by now is actually probably double that number, thanks to congressional demands that the Pentagon build more. Because we have to do something with all that war money. So it makes sense to funnel it to cops that then become occupying forces in poverty-ridden neighborhoods, when all the while, the clear-cut solutions to poverty and crime are really obvious. As Popular Resistance noted in a recent article, there are some pretty common sense responses. Provide people jobs, stop taking people's homes, make sure that people have affordable places to live, increase the number of truly affordable housing, and provide some type of tax benefit for working people so that they can keep their homes. Definitely invest in public schools. Provide resources and programs for kids and recreation centers. Restore the recreation centers that were closed, especially in places like Baltimore. Provide subsidized mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment for people who need it. If we do those things, crime will go down. Indeed, crime will go down. Public health will go up. Living standards will rise, along with quality of life. Hell, life expectancy will go up. Maternal and infant mortality rates will fall. Literacy will go up. Public and civic engagement will go up. Oh, can't have that. This tangled web where everything's connected. Spending money that the people have paid into a system back to those very same people means that those people will have better lives and more time and energy to spend on making those lives even better, on progress. And that scares the shit out of the sycophants of empire. It scares the shit out of the Pentagon and their pimps, the war profiteers. So again, dollars and common sense. Both things that the empire doesn't want us to have. And that is precisely why it's so important that we connect all of our issues to war, to the giant black hole that's sucking resources, lives, and our very futures away from us. We cannot work on any single issue, and we cannot work on any issue without addressing the unmatched gravitational pull of the military-industrial complex. And speaking of empire, we now turn to Puerto Rico, the United States colony that's been pummeled not only by hurricanes and earthquakes, but by that same vampiric tag team of capitalism and imperialism. Natural disasters are one thing, man-made disaster capitalism is quite another. Here to talk more about it are Martín Cobian and Pluma Moreno, coordinators of the Mutual Help Center of Lares. Take a look.
By some estimates, in at least the municipality of Guanica, which is pretty much the epicenter, somewhere around 50% of the housing stock was damaged substantially. So that it will require some fixing. And then, from the physical, situation, then you also travels to the sort of more psychological situation, losing or for a lot of people, these are, for the most part, this is some of the poorest areas in Puerto Rico, the southwest area. A lot of farm workers live in these areas. And basically the only thing they have for sure, like the only asset that they have is their house. And they're usually really small, modest houses. And they've been built over a long time. I mean, these are families that have been living in these houses for 20, maybe 30, 40 years, So you have the grandparents and you have the nephews and, big extended family. And for them, this is sort of like their safe haven, has been for forever, especially against, the inequities, the general inequities that we suffer here as a colony of the United States. So for that to go from being a safe haven to a possible death trap, that really, really generates psychologically a lot of difficulty for people and for all of us, And then the other thing that you see and it's very shocking is that, because of that, people they're tied to their house. They don't want to leave because they have all their belongings in there, right? But they also don't want to go to the refuge. What do you call that?
Shelter.
Refugee centers of the government is establishing, because it's usually really far away. And many of them don't even have cars. It's kind of like a situation. So they just prefer to stay nearby. Some of them actually they live outside in the street. They go in and out for a very short amount of time. Or, which is something that we've seen quite a lot of, is people in the street, they will form their own camp, refugee camp, so to speak, and then sort of go from there, right? And take and address each other's needs. And I think, what's really made it worse is that the earthquakes haven't stopped. So you keep having these aftershocks, and sometimes they're really strong, sometimes they're low, but they're constant. So basically, the catastrophe, so to speak, hasn't ended, hasn't finished, and we're going from the natural, quote unquote, disaster to now the human-made disaster, which is all the problems that we're having with the government. No sé si.
Sí. Yo estuve in the statistics. There's been like a total of 16,947 shakes. So that's a lot. It's a lot.
16,000.
16,000. I'm right now checking the statistics. But also there's another issue. Our culture in Puerto Rico, when they build the house, it's built in columns. A lot of our culture they build in columns because they have family that move up or down of the house. So we have like this tension, the whole tension of the family suffering the need to move from their homes, and in also the cultural space has been very touched because of that, and then people having to leave their community, their neighbors, and so that's what have make people to make their own camps. And in Puerto Rico, there are more than 300 campamentos, ¿verdad? More than 300, and that's a lot.
This is in a time when Puerto Rico still hasn't fully recovered from the hurricanes, right?
Yes, we were saying that there's still many houses. The amount was from the amount of houses that still don't have ceiling, that they still have the tarts, toldas, right? The tarts.
Yeah. So blue tarts.
The blue tarts.
The FEMA blue tarts. And
it's still around from 20,000 to 30,000
houses,
which is very awkward. That from 20 to 30, we still don't know the exact amount of houses.
The issues of corruption and of just how much the colonizing force, the United States, has failed. I saw some really powerful images. For instance, a person laying on the ground under a FEMA flag, and one person saying that the only government job was to distribute the supplies. And what did they do? They hid them and let us die. Talk about those warehouses stockpiled with aid that are just sitting there.
The thing is, like, it's negligence, but it's negligence that is obviously like informed by just people like corruption, and fundamentally what you have is so you have a lot of assets, you have a lot of there's a lot of money for reconstruction. There's a lot of money. But the money never trickles down. It never gets to the people that really need it. It gets caught up in like bureaucratic tape, supposedly, but bureaucratic tape is just it's a veneer, right, for like the way in which a lot of this is rechanneled to either private corporations or for political purposes as well. So you might get the thing where supplies will be distributed, but only to the families of those who vote for, ex-mayor or, and I mean, that's on the really low, right? That's on the really low. But if you go, if you keep going up the ladder, you start realizing that reconstruction post-Hurricane Maria and now post-earthquake is really about, there's this sort of, what you might call it, kind of like a struggle between like the capitalist in Puerto Rico and the capitalist in the United States in terms of who gets, the biggest share of the pie, right? Because fundamentally, like all the money that has come to Puerto Rico for reconstruction, almost I think like 95% of it or more has gone to American corporations. And because sometimes there's like, sort of the forces, none of them is able to win over the other. You get a stalemate and nothing happens. That's why you get warehouses full of stuff that doesn't circulate because nobody's really being able to pull enough leverage. The same with reconstruction money from post Maria. We've gotten nothing. You know how Trump was saying that 90 billion, just pulling information out of his ass. But we got nothing. I mean, because there's this fight, right? So while the capitalists and the local politicians, the colonial elite, and the U.S. Governors and the Promesa and all these other structures are fighting it out over who gets what, the people are they're left to dry, and it's obviously then the people of Puerto Rico. The people helping the people out, right? Solo el pueblo salva el pueblo, only the people save the people, right? So we are kind of back where we were post Hurricane Maria, and because we already know this is about, right from the start, the first day the hurricane happened, people started organizing, pooling resources, calling each other. Uh, Also, we have all these networks that have been developed because of the hurricane reconstruction, and with folks up in the United States, people like Mutual Aid Disaster Relief and other organizations that, they very quickly, they grab the phone and say, what do you need? How can we help? Right?
The people, la gente del pueblo is the one that needs to really do the government work. Like, we don't need no government. For what do we need the government? And that's what happened with the vagones. When we found the vagones in the south, and we found the vagones in Caguas, they had a lot of supplies that were captive since Hurricane Maria, since 2 years and a half. The supplies has been captive with things that were needed right now. Like as Martin was saying, there's one of the vagones had like 2,000 catres, beds,
Cots,
which people really needed because people were sleeping on the floor. Entonces, the question here is, this is what we know, but what about what we don't know?
right?
Right. We know there are more vagones hidden. We know there are more vagones, and we know that the government knew about this. The old administration and then this administration, they know.
Last year it was Ricky Renuncia, and now it's Wanda Renuncia. And I saw a picture of a guillotine, which was awesome, at one of the recent protests. Can you talk about like the issue of Wanda Vasquez and this sort of, there's just like endless ladders of corruption seemingly with regards to, as you said, like the capacity to do anything. How are people responding, and what's the plan moving forward?
Well, you see, Wanda Vasquez, she's Ricky's Rosselló, but with another face, because Wanda Vasquez in 2017 was named for La Jueza.
Yeah, she was
in 2017. She was named by Ricky Rosselló to administer, ¿verdad?
So she was Chief Justice of
and she was named by Ricky
Rosselló's administration. During the Rosselló administration, there were also a lot of so these like big semi trucks with a lot of supplies were found, like a year and a half later, and like tucked away in complete out in the woods. It's like, what is this doing here? And it was her responsibility to investigate. And she never investigated. So basically, she was there to cover Rosselló's ass, basically, and the irregularities around his more closest circle, and that just seems to have carried over.
So basically, the same schema is repeated now. So we just have another phase, which is the same. It's basically the same administration somehow, but it's just a different phase.
Do you feel like folks on the streets are making the connection between, Wanda Vasquez and Rosselló and the United States as a colonizing force?
Yeah, I mean, I think you ask everybody here in Puerto Rico, they will tell you this is new. It wasn't the case, but they will tell you that Puerto Rico is a colony. They know that now, and a lot of that has to do with Promesa, right? So I don't know if I'm sure a lot of your viewers are perhaps aware of this, dictatorial board that was imposed on Puerto Rico, basically to garnish, what little income the government has, and to pay off an odious debt that was generated basically over the last 20 years that has favored Wall Street enormously. So and in fact, a lot of the problems that we have right now in terms of the capacity for emergency relief, for reconstruction, and so on and so forth, has to do with the fact that a lot of our the money that would be there, especially at the level of the municipality, regardless of how much it was stolen, right? But there would be a lot more there to help out the people, right? So what you have now is that because there's a lot less, because a lot of it is going to pay off the debt or is being sequestered for that purpose, there's less money to go around, and it's the same middleman in between. And it's interesting because people, they don't blame the earthquake, right, or the hurricane, which a lot of people go like, oh, I lost my house, it's the hurricanes, it's the fault of hurricane or the fault of the earthquake. People, they blame the government. They blame the government, not because what happened in Puerto Rico with the hurricane is that we lost, there's 4,645 victims to the hurricane. And most of those, I'd say about 99% of those, was post-hurricane. It wasn't during the hurricane, it was post-hurricane. So that is not a natural disaster. That is a, state-led.
It's a political disaster.
And it's a political disaster.
People are clear about that. And what we, or as organizers or activists are talking about in different spaces is that the money that we need to reconstruct our island, the Banco Popular has it. Because there's an account, since Jose Carrion is the president of the Junta Control Fiscal, there's a big account with billions of dollars that have already been taken for the debt, and they have the money so we can reconstruct whole Puerto Rico. And the money with an illegal debt, right? Because we're clear about that. It's an illegal debt, and we're asking right now we're asking that the debt needs to be raised, and that money belongs to the people that has been already taken from or through austerity laws that has been imposed. Right. So and also another thing that in different organizations and also in the campamentos has been people are talking about, it's that there's many structures.
400,000 abandoned houses in Puerto Rico. 400,000.
And those are the ones that are registered. To be honest, in Puerto Rico, you cannot trust the statistics. If it says something, it's probably the double or something like that. So there's a huge amount of structures around the island that also belongs to the bank, and especially to the Banco Popular too. That has been reposeídas, ¿verdad? Reposeídas from people. Reposeídas, yes. And people are saying, so what are we doing? We don't have houses. We should start talking about rescatar those structures, those houses. Occupy. Yeah. Well, we say to rescatar, rescue.
We don't use the word occupy. We use the word rescue. So because the same.
Because it's ours.
The same happened with
it's ours.
building.
It's to the people. Belongs to the people. Mm-hmm. And people are talking about that. They're also talking about. We know that we need to talk about how to reestructurar the whole thing. Not in terms. I'm talking about the whole. How do we see Puerto Rico? What has happened to now, and what do we need to do? So, what is the Puerto Rico that we want? And that is the questions that in organizations are been talking about. We're doing census, right? Census. We're doing census in the campamentos, in the campamentos that are directed by the government, and all the other campamentos that are not under the government within the census to gather information and then take it back to the people and then help facilitate the different the decisions that the people of the campaments want to do.
How are people organizing in like mutual aid ways to make sure that folks have supplies and food and water and shelter? And how are people building like outside of the system without having to rely on that corrupt government?
I mean, I think the first point is, which I think we've stressed it from the beginning. It's just the willingness of the people, quote unquote, civil society, or just groups that get together to take over sort of the, I guess you would call it the emergency relief. A lot of emergency relief that would otherwise fall to the state, right? 2 or 3 days after the earthquake, when this report started coming out, um, it was like instantaneous. Like just people just started calling each other, organizing, collecting, and in less than 4 days, you had like a convoy, you know, self autogestionado, like just autogestionado would be like self generated convoy of cars, vans, pickup trucks, I don't know, like, whatever. If you had a bicycle, you got on your bicycle, just this line of just people bringing over supplies, right? So that's one thing, and that's carried. I mean, that's been sustained. It's not like it just happened like a one-off thing. It's just been sustained and it's been built up over time. But then the other thing that started happening that was really amazing is that census. People started picking like just individual volunteers going into these camps and asking people, "What are your needs?" Right? And then taking that to the internet. There's a web page that was created, which is actually amazing. There's a couple of web pages. But one, started having the names of all the camps because these are all new spaces of, I would call it spaces of resistance to, the cruelty and inequities of the colonial state. So you have all these camps, and then you could find them. You can go into you can still do this, and it's every 2 days it's being updated with the name of the camp, the people, and the needs. So like forget the UN. I mean, like forget like emergency relief UN. We built this thing like from nothing, just ingenuity, people bringing in their ideas and trying to use whatever they could do well and helping out with that.
For the complete interview with Martin and Pluma, which I really recommend that you listen to for more badassery, check out the Act Out podcast that's out this Friday, January 31st on Libsyn, Spotify, Stitcher, and iTunes. To connect with them, go to facebook.com/CAMJIBARO Lattice. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter, and if you can, donate to keep the show going. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Time we left for nothing, motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch, we got nowhere else to go.